Let's call her Emily. She's 40, a freelance graphic designer from a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and the summers are filled with fireflies. Emily's been married to her husband, Mark, for 10 years, and they don't have kids, just a quiet life filled with her art and his work as a mechanic. Emily met Mark at a local art fair, where he bought one of her prints and asked her out for coffee. He was kind back then, thoughtful, the kind of guy who'd leave little notes on her sketchbook just to make her smile. But over the years, Emily started to see the cracks. Not in Mark, but in his family. His parents, Richard and Susan, never seemed to like her. There were little comments. "Oh, you're still doing that art thing." And dismissive looks, like she was an afterthought in her own marriage. Emily ignored them because she loved Mark. She thought if she kept trying, kept being patient, they'd warm up to her. She was wrong. Last summer, Emily and Mark joined his family for a vacation in Hilton Head, South Carolina, a beautiful resort town with white sand beaches, palm trees, and the sound of waves in the distance. Emily was excited. She thought this trip might be different, that Richard and Susan might finally see her as family. She'd spent weeks planning everything, booking the hotel, the rental car, dinner reservations, even a spa day for Susan, all on her credit card because she was the organized one. The first night, they went to a fancy restaurant by the water. The waiter led them to a long table. And just as Emily was about to sit next to Mark, Richard spoke up. "Oh, there must be a mistake," he said, shaking his head. "She needs her own table." Emily blinked, thinking she'd misheard. "Excuse me," she said. Susan didn't even look up from the menu. "It's just how we do things," she said. Emily looked at Mark, waiting for him to say something, to tell them this was ridiculous. She was his wife, not a stranger. Instead, he sighed, shrugged, and muttered, "It's just their way." So Emily sat at a separate table, alone, while the family laughed and chatted without her. She should have left right then, but she didn't. The next morning, Emily woke up early, hoping to join the family for breakfast. She walked down to the hotel restaurant, expecting to see them waiting. They weren't there. She texted Mark. No response. After wandering for half an hour, she found them already eating at a large table, mid-meal, laughing like nothing was wrong. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming down?" she asked, confused. Richard barely looked up. "We assumed you'd figure it out," he said. Susan sipped her coffee. "It's just how we do things." Emily glanced at Mark. He was already eating, acting like this was normal. That was the moment she realized she wasn't part of their family. She never had been. The rest of the trip followed the same pattern. Every meal, she sat alone. Every activity, they forgot to tell her. They went on a private boat tour. Emily found out from their Instagram photos. They did a wine tasting. She realized when she saw them in the lobby, dressed up, heading out without her. She asked Mark later, "You could have texted me." He sighed, as if she was the problem. "It's just their way," he said. By the fourth day, Emily gave up. She stopped trying. They wanted her invisible. Fine. But they had no idea what was coming. That night, while the family was out drinking and toasting to their perfect vacation, Emily went back to the hotel room and got to work. She wasn't just sitting at a separate table anymore. She was about to remove herself completely. She pulled up her email, opened the reservation confirmations, and started canceling everything. The hotel rooms, cancelled. The rental car, gone. The dinner reservations at the waterfront restaurant, not happening. The spa day, Susan had been raving about. Emily called and politely informed them Susan wouldn't be attending. Then she packed her bags, took the rental car, and drove to Charleston. She booked herself a luxury suite, ordered room service, and sat on the balcony, watching the ocean, finally at peace. Meanwhile, back in Hilton Head, panic was setting in. The next morning, Emily woke up in Charleston, sipping coffee on a plush lounge chair, the ocean breeze drifting through her room. Her phone started buzzing. Mark, then Susan, then Richard. She turned it on silent and smiled. They'd finally noticed. A few hours later, Emily checked her messages. "Mark, where are you?" "Mark, what the hell is going on?" "Mark, you need to fix this now." She picked up his next call, just for fun. "Where are you?" Mark demanded. "Charleston," she said. A pause. Charleston. What the hell are you doing there? Enjoying my vacation, she replied. She could hear Susan yelling at the hotel staff in the background, Richard swearing under his breath. You cancelled everything, Mark said, his voice low. Yes, Emily said. He sucked in a breath. Do you have any idea what you've done? My parents have nowhere to stay. We had plans. You left us stranded. Oh no, Emily said, her voice dripping with fake concern. That must be so uncomfortable. Mark was silent, probably realizing she'd used his own words against him. You all wanted me to be separate, she continued. So, I gave you what you wanted. This is insane, he snapped. You need to come back. Emily laughed. No, Mark, I really don't. And she hung up. Emily later found out how bad it got for them. With the hotel fully booked, they had to scramble to find another place to stay. A dingy roadside motel, 20 minutes away. The kind with flickering lights and a weird smell. No rental car meant they had to Uber everywhere. But surge pricing in Hilton Head hit them hard. The fancy dinner Richard had bragged about, fully booked now. They ate at a tourist trap with screaming kids and bad seafood. Susan threw a tantrum at the spa when she realized her reservation was gone, but they wouldn't let her in. Mark sent angry texts. You seriously just left us like this. Mom is furious. She was humiliated at the spa. Dad is losing his mind over the restaurant. I hope you're happy. Emily was. But then something even bigger happened. A few hours later, her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, Mark's cousin. Hey, just wanted to say I heard what happened. And honestly, good for you. Emily frowned. Wait, what do you mean? Sarah's response made her stomach drop. They did the same thing to Mark's ex-wife. Emily's heart pounded. Mark had always said his first marriage to Rachel ended because they grew apart. Nothing dramatic, just differences. But now, Sarah explained. Rachel had gone on a family trip with them, and they treated her the same way. Separate table, ignored her, acted like she wasn't there. Rachel left halfway through and filed for divorce a month later. I didn't say anything before, because I figured you knew, Sarah wrote. But seeing what they did to you, I realized he never told you. No, he hadn't. Because if he had, Emily never would have gone on this trip. She would have known this wasn't just their way. It was a pattern, and Mark had known exactly what was happening. And he'd let it happen anyway. That night, Mark called again. I need you to fix this, he said, his voice tight. No, you don't understand. Emily cut him off. This wasn't about traditions. This was about control. You knew they were going to do this to me. And you let it happen. Silence. Who told you that? He asked. Emily laughed. So it's true. I wasn't the first. More silence. Then Mark sighed. Look, my parents can be difficult, but they mean well. Emily knew right then. He wasn't going to fight for her. He never had. Emily decided to dig deeper. She found Rachel's sister, Lauren, on Facebook and messaged her. Lauren responded quickly. I was wondering when you'd reach out. Emily's stomach twisted. So you know who I am? Yeah. Lauren wrote, we've been waiting for this to happen. Emily's breath caught. What do you mean? Rachel wasn't the first. You know, Lauren replied. And she sure wasn't the last. Mark has done this before, more than once. His parents have done this before, more than once. Emily felt sick. This wasn't just a pattern, it was a game. A twisted tradition they played on every woman Mark brought into his life. They never saw his partners as family, just obstacles. And Mark let it happen every time. Why didn't anyone tell me? Emily asked. We tried, Lauren said. But Mark always makes sure his girlfriends stay isolated. He tells them his family just has quirks. Makes sure they don't ask too many questions. Did he ever tell you Rachel was the problem? Emily closed her eyes. He had. He'd painted Rachel as difficult, dramatic. But now she knew the truth. Rachel hadn't been dramatic. She'd been trapped. And so had Emily, until now. At sexy. The next morning, Emily got a text from an unknown number. Mom, this is Officer Daniels with the Hilton Head Police Department. We need to speak with you regarding a missing persons report filed by your husband. Emily sat up, her heart racing. A missing persons report. She called back immediately. I'm fine, she blurted. I'm not missing. A pause. Ma'am, are you saying you left voluntarily? The officer asked. Yes, Emily said. My husband knows exactly where I am. He's been calling me non-stop. The officer sighed. Your husband reported that you left without explanation. and haven't been answering his calls. He said he was concerned for your safety. Emily clenched her jaw. This wasn't concern. This was control. Mark wasn't worried about her. He was trying to force her to come back. Officer, she said, her voice steady. I am perfectly fine. I am in Charleston. I left by choice. I am not missing, and I do not want my husband contacting me. A pause. Would you like to file a formal request for no further contact? Emily hesitated, then exhaled. Yes, I would. And just like that, she put the first legal nail in the coffin of her marriage. Not even an hour later, Susan started texting. I cannot believe you would humiliate us like this. Emily ignored it. You made Mark involve the police. Do you have any idea how this looks? Emily rolled her eyes. Then, this family has done nothing but try to welcome you. You're being incredibly selfish. You need to come back and fix this. And finally, if you don't come back, Mark is going to make things very difficult for you. Emily froze. It wasn't subtle, it was a threat. She reread the message, her heart pounding. They weren't just trying to humiliate her. They were trying to break her. But Emily wasn't going to roll over. She texted back. Perfect. Let's make things difficult then. Then she booked a hotel conference room in Charleston and invited everyone. Mark, his parents, and Sarah. If they wanted a war, she was bringing it to their doorstep. The next morning, Emily sat in the conference room, waiting. The long wooden table was set with nothing but bottled water and the thick silence of anticipation. The door slammed open. Mark stormed in, his jaw clenched. Richard and Susan followed, Susan's heels clicking sharply, Richard's face red with anger. Sarah came in last, hesitant, her arms crossed. She gave Emily a slight nod. Emily leaned back in her chair. Glad you could all make it. Mark's voice was sharp. What the hell is this? Emily smiled, slow and deliberate. A conversation. You've been so eager to talk. So let's talk. Richard scoffed. You think this is funny? No, Emily said calmly. I think it's pathetic. I think you people play sick little games with the women in your family. And you finally picked the wrong one. Susan's eyes narrowed. You abandoned us. Emily laughed. Oh, I abandoned you. That's rich, coming from the people who spent an entire vacation pretending I didn't exist. Mark exhaled harshly. You're blowing this out of proportion. That was it. Emily slammed her hands on the table, making Susan flinch. I am your wife, she said, her voice echoing. Cold and sharp, not a stranger, not an outsider, your wife. And you let them treat me like nothing. And you, she jabbed a finger at Mark, knew this wasn't the first time. You knew exactly what was happening. And you let it happen anyway. Mark's face paled. Susan cut in, her voice high-pitched. We were just following tradition. Emily shot back. It's not tradition. It's control. It's a test. And you fail every woman who walks into this family. Emily grabbed her phone, pulled up Lauren's messages, and threw it onto the table. Read it, she told Mark. He hesitated. Read it. Slowly, Mark picked up the phone and scrolled. His face tightened with every word. Then he threw the phone down. This isn't proof of anything, he said. Richard crossed his arms. You're digging up old stories. It has nothing to do with us. Emily turned to Susan. Is that right? Because last night, you threatened me. You told me if I didn't come back, Mark would make things difficult. Susan's mouth snapped shut. Sarah let out a low whistle. Wow. Mark turned to his mother, eyes narrowing. You did what? Susan stiffened. I was trying to make her understand. Understand what? Mark's voice rose. That you've been playing this game for years. That you did the same thing to Rachel. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Susan shot him a look, but the damage was done. Mark's jaw twitched. Jesus Christ. For the first time, Emily saw a crack in his loyalty to his parents. The moment he realized she'd been right all along. But then he ran his hands through his hair and sighed. I can fix this. Emily's stomach dropped. That was his instinct. Not an apology. Just fixing the optics. You really don't get it, do you? She said. Silence. She stood up, adjusting her bag. I'm not coming back. Mark. His eyes widened. Wait. What? I'm done, she said. Sarah snorted. Dude, how have you not figured that out by now? Susan's voice rose. This is ridiculous. You're throwing away your marriage over a misunderstanding. Emily shook her head. No, Susan. You threw it away. Richard. And you're sick. twisted way of treating people. Mark was just too weak to stop it. Mark reached for her arm, but she stepped back. Wait, let's talk about this. She held up a hand. No, Mark, you talk. You make excuses. You let them control you. But I'm done listening. She grabbed her phone and walked to the door. Mark's voice was desperate. Wait, where are you going? She turned back, staring at him one last time. I'm leaving. Susan scoffed. You can't just leave a marriage. Emily met her gaze, her expression unreadable. Watch me. Then she walked out. It took 6 months to finalize the divorce. Mark tried everything, begging, blaming, even accusing Emily of overreacting. But she never looked back. Sarah stayed in touch, telling her how things imploded after she left. Mark finally confronted his parents, and it wasn't pretty. Richard called him weak. Susan cried, saying Emily had brainwashed him. For the first time, Mark saw them for what they were. But it didn't change anything for Emily. She was already gone. She moved to Charleston permanently, renting a small apartment with a view of the ocean. She reconnected with old friends, started taking on new design clients, and even joined a local art group. One night, months later, she got a text from Mark. I see it now. I'm sorry. She stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. A year after the divorce, Emily's life looks different. She's free. Not just from Mark, but from the weight of trying to fit into a family that never wanted her. She started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. And her latest piece, a stormy ocean with a single boat breaking through the waves, just sold at a gallery for $2.
Janet.
She's not looking back because for the first time in years, she's exactly where she's supposed to be. Emily's story shows what happens when a family's toxic traditions push someone too far, and how uncovering their secrets can set you free. She was treated like an outsider in her own marriage, but she took back her power and built a new life. Sometimes, the hardest betrayals lead to the greatest freedom. What do you think? Should Emily have given Mark another chance, or was she right to walk away? Have you ever been treated like an outsider by your own family? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. These stories connect us, showing us we're not alone in our struggles. If you enjoyed this tale, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out. I'm here every day with new tales from Reddit and beyond. So stick around. See you next time.